All right, well, hello and welcome. We are so glad that you're here because today is our workshop on overcoming the intense power of a trauma bond. And we're going to unpack that quite a bit. I'm Annette Oltmans. I'm founder and CEO of the Mend Project. And each month we provide these free workshops, taking a deeper dive into various subtopics related to emotional abuse or that secondary layer of harm that happens by people that you've confided in, which we call double abuse. This month, we added a special workshop taking place next Wednesday to help people heal from the workshop that we did last month called Self-Love Deficit Disorder. And trauma bonds. So this next workshop is going to be called Self-Love Abundance. What are the steps that we need to take to reach self-love abundance, where we really believe in ourselves, love ourselves, and can take our power and feel really confident in who we are and where we stand in our relationships? You can register through our website, and please email my team or me at info@themendproject.com with any questions if you have any glitches. Before we dig into our topic today, I want to invite you to join us also for our upcoming comprehensive training, which begins next Tuesday. If you are in a painful and stressful relationship and you need clarity, or if you are a victim or a survivor, I encourage you to join us for this groundbreaking 4-week training starting next week. And each week I will be live for an hour or two to cover the material of this training. And you can find additional information on our website training page, or simply click on the link that Jill is sharing in the chat today. Okay, so let's get started. But first I need a sip of water. As we go, I would just love it, our team would love it, if you would be sure to jot down your comments and questions in the chat as soon as they come to your mind, and we'll address all of them during our Q&A period. And if you want to remain anonymous, we treat everyone anonymously anyways, but if you're extra cautious, we value your privacy and your sensitivity and ask that you send a private comment or question directly to Jill Rice, who will share anonymously for you. And you can see her contact in the chat. If you need to leave early, don't worry, we record every training, and you can head to our training and resource page on our website, where you will find the recording and also videos of other topics that might interest you. If you registered for today's training, we will email the recording to you. Before I define trauma bond, I'd like to make a quick note. While we talk about trauma bonding within romantic, intimate partnerships, it's also important that you understand that they can form within friendships and other relationships like family, community members at your church that you're particularly close to, things of that nature. And those trauma bonded friendships can also be abusive. For example, if you're a parent and you cannot understand why your child continually returns to a friend who treats them horribly, we encourage you to follow along and take a look at the risk factors, signs, and the solutions. In romantic partnerships or other intimate relationships with interpersonal, emotional, or physical violence, trauma bonding most frequently takes place when the victim experiencing the harm has already experienced early childhood trauma from disrupted attachment styles by their primary caregiver. So briefly, what we want for our children, and we want for our child within ourselves, is that we had a really safe and secure attachment with our primary caregiver. But, we're not taught in school how to be a good parent. And so we make lots of mistakes, and it can disrupt attachment styles. And so we're going to talk about that. A disrupted attachment is opposite of a secure attachment. It might include abuse and it might not. It might include neglect. It might include maybe not physical neglect, but emotional neglect, where the child is not really supported emotionally and allowed to express their emotions and have their parent help them process those emotions. It can come in the form of abandonment, or even a style of communication where the primary caregiver was just not emotionally available to service the emotional development and needs of the child. The disrupted attachment prevented them from having a healthy and loving emotional connection with one or more of their primary caregivers, which would have created familiarity that unconsciously led them to a similar intimate relationship in their adult years. In other words, a person with a history of abuse or attachment disruption is more susceptible to traumatic bonding in their adult relationships, and even choosing people that mimic some of the same behaviors that they had from their primary caregiver. And in contrast, if you had a really secure attachment with your parents, you're more likely to seek that out in your adult years. And you may not even know right now what, if there was a disruption in your attachment. So it's worth to do a little research on attachment styles. And maybe we'll do a talk on that in the near future, but it will help unpack some of that for you. We just don't have time to dig deep into attachment today. So what is a trauma bond? As the phrase indicates, it's a bond or a connection between two people. One who is an emotionally or physically abusive person, or emotionally unavailable, emotionally immature person, and the other who is the target of their abuse or their neglect or their selfishness, or you can attach any word to that. Trauma bonding occurs when the victim has a psychological response to abuse, which develops into a deep sense of empathy and perceived.
Hi.
Oops. Let's please mute ourselves. Thank you. I'm sorry for the disruption. So trauma bonding occurs when the victim has a psychological response to the adult intimate relationship, that when they're mistreated, rather than really saying, wait a minute, no, I'm not willing to accept that behavior, and have a sense of confidence to detach from that person, they instead are more overcome with a sense of empathy and a perceived meaningful connection with their abuser. It's not based on what's actually happening. It's a perception of a deep connection. People who experienced childhood trauma and early attachment disruption that are not resolved, in other words, you haven't as an adult gone to a therapist and really looked back at your childhood and unpacked some of the traumatic experiences that you had, or some of the parenting styles that still hurt you inside. We can overcome them, talk about them, but we need to work through them. If you haven't resolved early childhood trauma, then you're more susceptible to forming trauma bonds in toxic adult relationships where there are similarities to their childhood relationships. This form of bonding is not positive. It's actually destructive to oneself. I appreciate the words psychology today shared about trauma bonding, so I'm going to share them with you here. When we are faced with abuse and neglect, we are chemically wired to focus on getting to the other side. In other words, resolving the problems within the primary caregiver relationship. When an abuser is the person that brings us relief, even if the relief is temporary, the brain associates them with safety, even though that's not an accurate perception because they aren't safe. The brain latches on to the positive experience of relief, even though it may be very temporary, rather than the negative impact of the abuser who may not have yet begun to reveal abusive behaviors. In other words, they could be just emotionally unavailable. They may not be outright abusive or covertly abusive, but their lack of availability, their lack of support, their lack of empathy distorts the victim's perspective. And they actually believe they have an attachment with someone who is not really available for a safe attachment. And this happens because the body's threat response, that fight, flight, freeze, and appease response, turns off part of the brain that can think long-term when we are in a relationship crisis. This creates the feeling that we need the abuser to survive and reconnect with us in a healthy connection. And it's often mistaken for love. So we have this intense feeling of wanting to resolve the conflict and believing that this is a person who provides us a healthy and safe attachment, or at least we believe that they're capable of that. And so it's an unhealthy viewpoint that mistakens this type of relationship for a loving relationship, even though that's not what healthy love looks like. Excuse me 1 second. A trauma bond can develop when abusers use covert forms of abuse that make the victim believe they need the abuser's care and validation to feel whole. This causes them to become overly dependent on the relationship with the harmful partner, whether family, romantic, friends, or work-related. But usually it's more in an intimate relationship. They actually become addicted to the relationship and the positive attachment phases, even though they're very temporary and fleeting with their abuser, that they are willing to set aside, overlook the destructive phases, which prevent a safe, healthy, loving, emotional connection from ever really taking a firm root in the relationship. They remain laser focused on achieving the positive interactions, which may come and go periodically. When a victim has been conditioned in this way, they become a prime target for a narcissistic abuser. I'm just going to stop here for 1 second and say that when I was a child, if I did something wrong, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to express my emotions and say how I felt and talk it through. But my parents gave me the silent treatment and wouldn't communicate with me. And so later on in life, in my prior abusive relationship, I experienced the same thing, the silent treatment, and it reinforced in me this almost sense of panic and addiction to have that silent treatment end so that we could move forward. But it was not just an objective, healthy viewpoint. It was almost like a physical need to have that end that was distorted and that wasn't actually based on the facts within what caused the silent treatment. My feelings of that fear of abandonment, those feelings overtook that sense of almost addiction, overtook my objectivity. When a victim has been conditioned in this way, they become a prime target, like I said, for people who are abusive, because these victims are easily kept in an empathic and loving relationship because of some of these factors. So I want to ask you a question now. Do you feel you are in a trauma bond, or are you here to figure out if you are? We'd love for you to share more with us in the chat, and we'll just talk about a few of your responses. We won't have time to get to everyone, but it's so wonderful when you comment in the chat, because it really enriches our discussion and puts in perspective people's different experiences, and it helps us understand more. So I hope that if you feel you're in a trauma bond, or that you're here to figure out if you are, that you'll post that in the chat. Jill, would you like me to wait, or
Yeah, I'll just go ahead. We're having a number of people. Thank you all so much for sharing with us in the chat. Just Annette, we have a number of people saying, yes, I am in a trauma bond. And then I'll just share a couple more. And we do have people saying they're here to figure it out as well. Actually, we just had a couple hop in saying that. Um, they're coming in fast, which is amazing. We really appreciate this. So, yes, trauma bond with ex spouse of 35 years and someone who's here working with survivors of sex trafficking. So, hoping to learn how to better help them. Um, yeah, so we have a number of people who are here for various reasons.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So a trauma, um, well, in our workshop on self-love deficit disorder, we talked about codependency. I don't really love the phrase codependency. I like self-love deficit disorder better because I think that professionally codependency, there's a lot of different interpretations of what it actually means. It's not in the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic tool book for therapists and for the medical profession. But when we can look at codependency instead as a lack of self-love, a lack of really believing in yourself and understanding that you are lovable and you are worthy of a healthy, consistently healthy relationship. When there's this lack of self-love, then the victim begins to overcompensate, overfunction. And so a trauma bonded victim is not the same as one who is codependent or who has self-love deficit disorder, although both can exist in the same relationship. Because a codependent believes their abusive person needs them to care for them and to help them receive the help for their destructive attitudes, behaviors, and places the abuser's needs over their own personal needs. Codependency enables the abusive person to continue the unhealthy power and control that they exert, whereas a trauma bonded victim is more simply stated addicted to the relationship and sees the abuser's actions as love, notwithstanding the harm that the abuser causes. When there is chronic abuse, the love is not an authentic style of love. It's not a healthy form of attachment. It's very disruptive and it's chaotic. But a trauma bond misinterprets periods of affection as authentic love. Trauma bonds do not take place in every abusive situation, but once they are formed, they're hard to break. The abused person vacillates between failing to understand why they keep returning to the abusive person harming them, and then on the other hand, believing they could not possibly live without them. The confusion for the person experiencing trauma bonding, combined with the incredible pull to the relationship, makes that abused person feel as if the bond is true love, but it's not. Trauma bonded individuals experience this cognitive dissonance where there's a disconnect between what is actually happening and what they perceive to be happening. And they lack the clarity and an accurate sense of understanding. They mistake the patterns, identifying the lack of a meaningful emotional connection with their feelings that crave a secure attachment with their abuser. Let me say that one more time. They mistake patterns, identifying the lack of meaningful emotional connection with their feelings that crave a secure attachment with their abuser. Their obsession with the positive stages of the abusive cycle blind them to, or at least makes them willing to tolerate the abuse and classify it as less important, as something less critical to focus on. They mischaracterize the abuser's false promises, insincere statements, or doses of affection as love, making it nearly impossible for them to distinguish true love from an abusive situation. But a trauma bond is not love because of the regular disruption of a positive attachment. A healthy mutual love never truly develops or matures. And the trauma bonded victim has an incredibly hard time identifying what is actually taking place. Remember, it might be so familiar to what they experience from their primary caregiver that they aren't able to identify it as an impure love or an insecure attachment, an unhealthy attachment. They're more focused on internalizing that they need the relationship. They believe that it's loving, that the parts that are loving make the whole relationship loving, or the parts that they perceive to be loving, which really aren't true love, because the two, true love and abuse, unhealthy attachment, can't align up in the same relationship. In relationships, we have an intrinsic human need for a secure attachment, along with the sense of emotional intimacy and emotional safety and physical safety with people that we believe to be partners, caregivers, close friends, or family, but particularly intimate partner relationships. We first form attachments to our primary caregivers. So I said that. And healthy attachments in our formative years encourage healthy relationships and connections, hopefully with a healthy love that is open-hearted, open-minded, safe, and encouraging in their, encouraging them in their autonomous endeavors and autonomous emotional perspectives. So there is space, there is room, and there is still support for a person who might not have the same points of views as their intimate partner, but there's mutual respect, there's mutual validation, and there's room in the relationship for both people's perspectives to be respected, and to not have the love and the connection disrupted. However, a trauma bond cycle creates repetitive interruption of any positive attachment, leaving the victim desperate to return to those positive feelings, even if the relationship demonstrates long patterns of maltreatment. The abused person desperately craves the attachment and positive connection with their protector, their person who they perceive as the protector, who actually is their abuser. And this is what they experienced during the first stages in the relationship, when the abuser put their best foot forward and manipulated their partner into believing that he or she was safe and in a loving relationship. So not all abusers do this, but often they love bomb and they shower you with affection and they put their best foot forward, and they do a lot of things that create a false perception that it's going to be safe. There's no way the victim can anticipate, unless they're really in tune with red flags, anticipate that the relationship is going to take on a whole different dynamic in the near future. So during the time that it's going really well is when they start believing that the relationship is loving and safe. When someone is traumatized by a romantic partner, their brain releases certain chemicals, one of which is oxytocin. Oxytocin is partially responsible for reducing the effect of a traumatic situation. And so when there is a wound that needs to heal, oxytocin services the victim. It also stimulates feelings and perceptions of psychological, social attachment. Thereby, the oxytocin actually increases the resilience to subsequent or later traumatic events. So we have this chemical imbalance thing going on that is increasing the traumatized person's resilience to receiving more trauma, while they, in between the traumatic periods, are believing that the attachment is loving, and they become addicted to those, to getting the positive moments back in the relationship. They become addicted to the relationship, really trying to prove that they're lovable and that they're worthy and that the relationship truly is what they perceive it to be. They have a very difficult time stepping outside of the relationship and viewing it more accurately based on what's actually occurring. A trauma bond is more than emotional attachment. It is a form of addiction. The victim craves the bonding phases for the high that the oxytocin release gives them. As with drug addictions, victims will excuse, hide, or lie about the abuse to prevent others from confronting them about the relationship, or possibly, encouraging them to leave or something along those nature. They actually protect the relationship and protect the abuser. And rather than saying, like if you're invited to a dinner party or something, getting to the point where you say, I can attend, but I can't speak for my partner. They'll have to answer you directly. In other words, that would be maybe more honest than the person, your partner, not agreeing to go to a dinner with you and then in the last minute saying, I'm not going. And then there you are left to say, oh, they got sick, or, you make up stories to protect them when you should be willing to say, I don't know, they just decided not to come, and let them deal with the consequences of that. Don't take on the responsibility for the abuser. But so often trauma bonded individuals will say anything to protect their abusive spouse. There are several stages of trauma bonding that I'll briefly touch on for time's sake, and you can read more about this in our blog. During these stages, the abuser intermittently reinforces the positive and negative, then catches the victim off guard. The victim loses the time and presence to see the toxicity in the relationship, instead remaining in a state of intense confusion. Between these positive and negative periods, each time the negative occurs, it catches the victim off guard because they're so attached in their mind. They are falsely attached to somebody who's inconsistent, who's not attachable. They're not safe. And so they continually are confused when the negative occurs, wondering if it's something they did. They're more willing to self-blame and to self-doubt and to do whatever to return the relationship back to a positive state. So the stages are, number one is love bombing. That usually occurs at the beginning of the relationship, where everything is going, euphorically and beautifully. And then the second stage is when it's developing trust and dependence. So because of the love bombing, you trust this person and you actually start to develop a sense of dependence on their attention towards you. Then the next stage that happens is criticism, where it changes and the abuser becomes critical. And the fourth stage is gaslighting, where they begin gaslighting the victim. Or the victim gaslights themselves into believing something is true that actually isn't true. And number five is resigning to control, where the victim gives up control and really tries to accommodate the abuser. And the sixth stage is a loss of sense of self. So they really lose a sense of who they are. It's a very lonely place to be, because the victim feels, who am I? Am I worthy of love? Like, what's causing all this chaos? I must be intrinsically faulty or unlovable, and there's a loss of sense of who they should be, want to be, or who they really are. And so then number 7 is there's an addiction to the cycle where the victim is just longing for the positive reinforcement to come back, overlooking all the negatives. Love bombing is the most essential step, which enables the abuser to entice the partner into a trauma bond. And here, the abuser lavishes the other person with attention, affection, or flattery, often filling an internal void in the victim who's been longing for true love and positive reinforcement. And usually the relationship progresses quickly during this phase when the abuser identifies you as their soulmate or professes their desire to be with you forever. Things of that nature. Be on alert if the adoration seems so fast and sudden that it catches you a little off guard. If your partner's affection is over the top, such as whisking you away on an extravagant trip early on versus giving you something small and appropriate for the stage you're in, pay attention to those things. Slow things down. A healthy, lifelong relationship is not forged in a month. It takes a long time. It should take a long time because there's so many aspects that we need to get to know about each other and to see their character values, to see their character structure, and to be able to recognize red flags and patterns. We need to slow things way down. The next step in the trauma bonding process is developing trust and dependence. Once they have lavished you with flattery, gifts, and attention, they will do many things to make you trust them and increase your dependence on them. They make promises that sometimes they won't fulfill, or they will fulfill them in the beginning, and then later in the relationship, the relationship is full of broken promises. When you find yourself longing for their love, their validation, and acceptance, even craving it, it's an addiction that you're developing a trauma bond, or said another way, an addiction to the relationship rather than seeing the overall relationship accurately. Next is criticism. The honeymoon is over, and no matter what you do, it may not be good enough. The abuser reacts to the victim's expressions of maybe sadness or disappointment, or maybe he or she brings up a genuine concern or a criticism. And the abuser does not accept any responsibility, does not validate any feelings of sadness or disappointment or concerns. Instead, they reverse the blame. They place responsibility onto the victim. And so the victim is completely caught off guard, not having their needs met, and suddenly they're on the defensive, having to explain themselves even further, and being held to be responsible for the conflict. The abuser may begin picking you apart, demeaning your qualities, or making you feel like your values and beliefs are the problem in the relationship. The shift in treatment is rather sudden and in stark contrast to the love bombing and trust stages that the only logical reason to the victim is they must have done something wrong to make their partner change so abruptly. So victims, rather than seeing that something is flawed in their partner, take it on that something is wrong with themselves. The victim turns inward in self-blame, self-doubt, and feelings that they may be intrinsically flawed. Then they desperately seek to resume connection through repeated apologies or accommodating the abuser or gaslighting themselves, and actually viewing manipulation, blame, and abuse as normal expressions for the abuser to communicate. So they see them as, this is the way my partner communicates, while at the same time they're hoping to avoid a downward cycle of more abuse. So the deception of the earlier phases doesn't allow the victim to believe that the abuser is the problem. After all, they love you, don't they? I mean, that's what they've shown you in the beginning, but you missed the other signs, or when these other signs appeared, you failed to view it accurately and you're still clinging on this manipulative, the way that you were manipulated into believing more positive things about the person causing you harm. So this leads me to the fourth step that I mentioned, gaslighting. It's one of the most common forms of psychological abuse. Gaslighting is a covert tactic aimed at making the victim question their own reality, perception, or sanity. Gaslighting can include false accusations made against the victims. It's like inventing false narratives that are the victim's fault, even though they didn't occur, or lying, saying anything to make the victim feel that they're going crazy, blame shifting, etc. And over time, the gaslit victim believes they are the ones who need help, not the abuser. Internal help for themselves, not help for the relationship, but that something is wrong with them. Likely the victim is accustomed to gaslighting from earlier years, making them automatically internalize it as though something is wrong with themselves. And in this way, they're also gaslighting themselves because they aren't seeing the situation accurately. So in this way, gaslighting moves well beyond criticism and into the world of fiction, which causes tremendous confusion. As soon as the victim demonstrates worry or concern for their own well-being, their partner plays nurturer, possibly recommending counseling or expressing concern that the victim is not emotionally well, and that they need help. And this satisfies the victim's need to believe that the abuser truly cares. And they mistake the abusive manipulation tactics for love all over again. So even in this gaslighting, where the victim says, confesses, I feel like I'm going crazy or something is wrong with me, the abuser will pretend, knowing full well they have been gaslighting them, they will pretend to care about their well-being and saying, yes, I need you to, I think it'd be important for you to see a specialist or to go to a physician or whatever. Or they might start talking to their friend, the abuser might start talking to their friends saying, oh, please pray for my spouse because she's really unstable. And they start setting the stage in the public arena to gaslight them there and to turn people against the victim, isolating the victim even more. And then step 5 is resigning to control. Left completely depleted by the gaslighting phase, the victim begins to shut down, possibly disassociating, overcome with severe confusion and feelings that there is nowhere to turn and no idea how to address the conflict. They submit to their partner's control in order to avoid future conflicts. The victim becomes an expert at people pleasing to try to manage the relationship. So they are now completely entrapped in distortion, not seeing the relationship accurately, and they work overtime to accommodate the abuser. The level of confusion for the victim is at an all-time high at this point. They might have a sixth sense that they are being manipulated, but the extraordinary confusion they feel dims their cognitive senses and deters them from taking concrete steps to secure an intervention of the relationship or to end the relationship. The balance is tipped in favor of self-blame and self-doubt. If only I could be better, or if only I could try harder, or if only if I said it differently, maybe then he would understand. And the victim just, as I mentioned before, works much harder at the relationship, putting forth tremendous efforts to improve in communication, to keep the relationship at all costs. In essence, the victim and abuser are working together to support the abuser, while no one in the relationship is caring for the needs of the victim. Next, they experience a loss of self. So a loss of sense of self. And this is the whole point for the abuser. The victim loses their self-esteem and sense of self, and they relinquish their prior healthy boundaries to the person abusing them. A loss of self makes it difficult, if not impossible, for the victim to have transparent and meaningful connection with anyone outside the relationship, increasing their isolation. They are so confused and so full of self-doubt that they don't take the risk of sharing intimate details with someone who might be able to be a helper. They also lack confidence. They feel intense shame. They're lonely. They're depressed. There's probably a lot of anxiety and even suicidal ideation. But they feel something is intrinsically wrong with them, so they don't confide and seek help. And having arrived in this place, it's hard to imagine how to leave. The relationship is the only attachment they falsely believe they have, and most can't fathom leaving it. And perhaps after many months, years, or even decades have passed, the victim may come to recognize that they are in an abusive relationship, but the trauma bond now is firmly rooted, making it extremely difficult for them to imagine leaving, unless they are able to really begin to detach from their abuser and work on getting stronger and changing those low feelings of themselves. Like we talked about in the last workshop, what is it? Deficit disorder. When you have self-love deficit disorder, that lack of love, you have to work hard to get that back. And unless a victim is willing to acknowledge that they actually have work that they need to do on themselves to put this relationship in more accurate perspective, to have any chance at holding the abuser accountable to see if they would be willing to change, or any chance to separate from the relationship, and to be fulfilled and to feel not this deep sense of loss and this addiction to this other person. They're going to have, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to imagine leaving if they haven't done that kind of work, which we're going to talk about in our next workshop. And then finally, step 7, addiction to the cycle. Trauma bonds are powerful because they're rooted in the victim's desperate need for a safe and secure attachment. We've mentioned that. The target becomes addicted to the relationship cycle. The abuser uses things like withholding communication or affection to deprive their partner of the feeling of attachment and relationship, and increases the victim's desperation for the earlier phases of the relationship. The victim will try anything to win back their partner's affection. The victim will accept crumbs of affection, starting the cycle all over again. And their ability to, so even after they've been mistreated, if there's even just crumbs of affection, the victim will accept this and move on, ignoring the abuse that occurred, whether it's emotional or physical, or whether it's manipulative or whatever it is. Their ability to return to a positive phase makes the victim believe their abuser really loves them. It reinforces their self-blame as they hope for a better future. And those hopes are repeatedly dashed, leaving the victim longing even more for a sense of secure attachment. Remember, all this is combined with the neurotransmitters being released by the victim's brain chemistry, resulting in physical addiction to the relationship. There's other chemical things going on too, from the stress, like cortisol, which really affects the victim's ability to cognitively see things accurately. The stress, causes fragmented communication, and it distorts the way the brain processes, and so it compromises their ability to see things clearly, all the stress and the confusion, because confusion causes stress. There can be many effects of trauma bonding relationships, including post-traumatic stress disorder, or if the harm continues for a long while, and if the victim is particularly isolated, complex post-traumatic stress, a more difficult form of PTSD to heal, takes over. Symptoms of PTSD can increase the victim's desperation for the relationship. Let me explain this a little bit more. As we said, in adult relationships that include a trauma bond, one or more or both of the individuals usually experienced disrupted attachment through intermittent positive and negative attachment styles in their primary early relationships, along with the PTSD from childhood that might not have been resolved. So the intense fear of leaving an abusive partner with whom you are trauma bonded can escalate significantly when the victim already has symptoms of PTSD carried over from childhood. So existing PTSD intensifies the need to have their wounds soothed by their abuser or intimate partner. It can make decisions to leave more confusing, even sending the victim into like panic attacks and fluctuating heart palpitations, increased heart rate, nausea, etc. And these symptoms are intensified when the victim has PTSD from earlier relationships, making it even harder for them to break out of the bond and see clearly what is actually occurring. PTSD also causes a victim to distrust others, becoming suspicious of anyone who questions the relationship or the abuser's love for the victim. Any outsider who suggests the victim leave the abusive situation actually adds trauma, because the victim desperately believes they need the relationship. And so it blindsides them. That's why it's so important to not pressure victims to leave or separate, or we need to help walk them through the steps of what they need to do to begin to love themselves more, to get stronger, to educate them, to help them find clarity before they on their own will be able to make a determination to stay or to leave. The victim will often even shut out any person who is not fully in support of their relationship, which includes the victim protecting the abuser's reputation and their relationship at all costs. If you're wondering if you're experiencing trauma bonding in your relationship, here are a handful of warning signs that I'd like you to consider. You are willing to overlook the abuse in order to re-experience love bombing. You cover up or minimize the abuse by making excuses for the abuser's behaviors. You lie to others about the abuse. No matter what, you can barely fathom leaving the relationship. The thought makes you feel almost ill, sick, nauseous, extremely fearful. There's a hyper focus on the abuser's every want or need, or intense thoughts and feelings to determine how to get your own needs met by the abuser. So there's so much intensity invested in trying to get your own needs met that you don't realize that no matter what you do, it's not producing a healthy attachment. So they're again failing to see the situation accurately. And then lastly, an intense emotional bond with the abuser, a longing for that emotional bond and feeling a true connection and feeling true love for the abuser. If any of this resonates with you, please join us for our 4-week training, which begins next Tuesday. Head to our website training page or click on the link that Jill has shared in the chat. Also, in our blog on trauma bonding, we lay out some more warning signs of trauma bonding along with strategies for breaking free from a trauma bond. It's very difficult to break trauma bonds, but it's not impossible. But it does take hard work. And I think that is a big hurdle that victims need to overcome because they're so invested in working on the relationship. They don't want to recognize that a lot of work needs to go into themselves, to making themselves stronger, to letting go of the relationship a little bit and focusing more on their own healing. And it's very counterintuitive for them when there's a trauma bond. But there are things that you can do, such as educate yourself, listen to podcasts, take classes, join support groups, read books, articles, or blogs on trauma bonding, childhood attachment trauma, and covert emotional abuse. The more you learn, the more aware you will become about the reality of your attachment to your relationship and partner. Gaining clarity is the first necessary step to healing. Take a pause. At this point, take a pause from over-functioning in the relationship and working on pleasing your partner. Try to just set some healthy limits that will allow you to pour effort into yourself, into your own healing, into, learning more, reading more, maybe taking a class, maybe going to support groups, maybe exercising more, doing things for yourself that will produce endorphins and positive chemistry to help counterbalance some of the negative chemistry that's going on during this trauma bond. The next step is to gain more clarity. Take a look at your relationship and how your partner treats you in all phases of the cycle. Accept the knowledgeable information you have read or researched and allow it to begin changing your beliefs about how relationships should function in order to be healthy. And also in this phase where you're gaining more clarity, really look at the abusive patterns that your partner is employing against you. Because the more familiar you can become with these patterns of behavior that play out over and over, the more you won't be sideswiped and caught off guard. The more you won't, for example, if it's a false accusation, the more you won't feel the need to have to defend yourself. You can just say, well, that's completely false, and move on. You don't have to say that, no, that didn't happen. I did this and you said that, and you defend yourself, you're on the hot seat. The more you understand the patterns of behaviors being used against you, the more you won't be swept up into the chaos, and you can distance yourself from that. And then the next step is to go deeper. Once you clarify the types of toxic behaviors you face in your relationship, go deeper in your knowledge about attachment, about abuse, about self-love deficit disorder, for example. Why are you not loving yourself? Really maybe working with a therapist or doing some important reading on your early attachment styles and really trying to pinpoint the ways that your parents may have made mistakes that shaped your thoughts that you need to work on changing and overcoming. Write down every conflict that you have with your abuser in this gaining more clarity phase. It's really helpful if you can journal. If you write down every conflict to not only help you know what is accurate when you get gaslit and told, no, I never said that, you have it in writing, but you're creating a paper trail in case you have to enter the court system. You're actually providing supporting information. But it really helps you when you're being gaslit a lot. If you can write down I said this, he said that, or we argued about this, and this is the main points that were stated. And you can see it, and it tangibly validates you when your spouse or your abusive partner says, that never happened, you're making things up. You have it there in writing and you know it to be true. Excuse me. Pay attention to yourself. When you focus on what is actually happening in the present, pay attention to how it makes you feel. Your emotions, your body, your thoughts. Really begin to recognize those things and take an inventory on that and write it down. It's so important for you to recognize the emotional dysregulation that occurs during the negative cycles, and what makes you feel really good. Like, write these down, get in tune with your body. The next is to stop magical thinking. Magical thinking is when someone continues to hold on to hope that love will happen soon, that things will get better, that bad things won't happen if I change or if they just change. Like, in other words, all they have to do is go to a couple of therapy sessions and change. This is not reality, so it is magical thinking. Or that an unemotional or superficial apology from your abuser will translate to lasting change. Try to focus on what is actually happening today and moving forward, and the patterns that you recognize from the past. Focus on reality, what is actually occurring. Don't go cold turkey. It's very hard to have an all or nothing approach to breaking a trauma bond if you'll set yourself up. Okay, let me say that differently. If you do the all or nothing approach, in most cases, you'll set yourself up for failure. Smaller steps at a time allow you to gain strength and courage to take bigger steps that you'll eventually need to take, whether you decide to stay in the relationship or leave. You'll still need to be taking bigger steps in terms of holding boundaries, creating a life for yourself outside of the home, and so forth. And seek mental health services. If you can, get a therapist who is trained and experienced in helping victims of abuse and trauma, PTSD, trauma bonds. Learn questions to ask, how to find the right therapist for your situation. You want to tell a therapist that you're shopping for a therapist, you're interviewing therapists, and usually you can get a free consultation. And you can ask them questions about what they know about trauma bonds or about abuse or about attachment styles, particularly trauma though. And if they ask you stupid questions or questions that really trigger you, like, why are you still in this relationship? That's a very triggering question, because now suddenly you feel like the therapist is judging you and you're having to explain yourself. Then you know this is not a trained therapist, because a true trauma-informed therapist would never ask you a question like that. And any other gut feelings that you get in the interview that tell you they don't know what they're doing, listen to yourself and move on to another therapist. Find community. Perhaps join a support group or find a few friends you can trust who will help you remain focused on your healing. You may not have thought so before, but you will begin to recognize that you are not alone. There are others who understand and can help keep you strong. Community, even if an online group with individuals facing similar problems, is very important. You cannot heal well in isolation. If family or friends are judgmental or unsupportive or critical of you, it's important to create distance from those relationships and instead find safe spaces where you will experience validation, education, and support in a non-judgmental environment to give you the space and time to process all of these intense feelings and information. When people are critical and judgmental, like family and friends, it's not going to be helpful. It's just going to re-trigger you. So just don't confide in them, just create a little distance and confide in safe people, like in your support group. Don't give up hope. There's more that you can do to bring healing to your soul and your body. In addition to steps to help you break free from the bond, here are some steps to help you recover. Okay, seek professional help. It's, I know I'm going over on time a little bit, but I'm almost done, and then I'll get to your questions. So if you have to leave, I understand, but I'm just going to go through these last steps. Now I just lost my place, so let me find it again. What page am I on in my notes, Jill? Here we go. All right, sorry. Seek professional help. It's so important to address the early childhood trauma as well as the adult trauma with a specialist who can help you identify and reform some of the coping and attachment mechanisms keeping you in unhealthy relationship cycles. It's also very important to address why you feel intrinsically flawed or unlovable or less deserving. It's really worth the effort to work on that, and keep educating yourself. We can't state it enough. The more you learn and understand, the more clarity you will have. Join the MEND Project training courses. You'll learn so much in that. It'll help jumpstart any therapeutic efforts that you have for yourself. Or even if you join a support group, it'll jumpstart your clarity. And have patience. Healing is a journey that isn't always easy, but it's always worthwhile. Don't expect a quick experience where you reach perfection or results to happen overnight. It takes time. You may make a decision 1 week that later, after additional education and learning, you determined it to be a mistake. Don't judge yourself. Be kind, have patience. It's okay to change your mind later to better serve yourself. Self-love, positive self-talk and positive self-assessment is critical. Everyone is deserving of experiencing emotional and physical safety and healthy attachments. You are no different. Everyone is deserving of that. So speak kindly about yourself to yourself in front of the mirror. Surround yourself with people who are going to speak positively about you and encourage you. And have self-compassion. This can be very difficult at first because you're likely accustomed to blaming yourself and believing your partner who's blaming you for the problems. It's okay to fail. Get up after a fall and take a few steps forward. You're not failing. You're human. You are in the process of learning and healing, which takes time. So be compassionate. Self-care. Take a deep breath and remember that you've been through a lot. You deserve your own positive attention and care. So take time to think about the choices you're making. Take time to spoil yourself with a hot bath, reading a good book, starting a new exercise class, and so forth. This will be really hard to do because when you're stuck in isolation and you're depressed and you're confused and you're trying to process so much in your mind, the last thing you want to do is go sign up for an exercise class. But force yourself to stretch yourself. Even get an accountability partner if you need to encourage you. Did you sign up for a class this week? Do you want to go for a walk? Like, you need activity. You need to make yourself do this if you want to expedite your healing. And then allow yourself to grieve. Too many victims of those helping them overly focus on getting to the next stage of healing miss the power of grieving well. And we have at the Men Project, we have something called the healing model of compassion, which is how to properly interface with somebody going through abuse. And grieve is one of the critical steps that we teach responders to allow the victim. There's a lot of grief, such as the potential loss of the relationship, or the loss of the dream of what the relationship you thought it could be, or knowing that if you make decisions in the future that you may lose a lot by leaving the relationship, or you may lose a lot by choosing to stay in the relationship. Allow yourself to grieve. It's a heavy topic and it deserves that process and find support. You can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE, or connect with your local domestic violence agency to get help. There's also intimate partner violence support groups you can find online or in person, and online therapy services specializing in trauma-informed care. And we can refer you to some of those. In closing, I want to invite you to stay connected to us if you aren't already by joining our mailing list, where you will receive our blogs, newsletter, and updates about our training courses. Please head over to our website and sign up today to continue along this journey. And don't forget to look into our upcoming training for anyone in a painful and stressful relationship needing clarity, or for victims and survivors, by using the link that Jill shared in the chat. And be ready for our next workshop next week about self-love abundance and the steps that you actually need to take, the work that you need to do. We're going to outline the steps you need to take to overcome self-love deficit disorder, and get to a place of self-love abundance where you are secure in yourself, you are autonomous, you love yourself, and it's good enough. You believe in yourself and you're healthy, and you're not willing to settle for a disrupted or disorganized or chaotic attachment. So now we'd like to take time for any questions that you have. Please feel free to drop them in the chat at this time.
Okay, Annette, we have had an amazing, very full chat. And so I want to acknowledge everybody who
Hey,
I know sent a comment, sent a question. I do know that the setting was that all of them went to me. So I want to say just to everybody who's still here, you are not alone. We see every single one of you. There are dozens of people in this meeting today who have shared various experiences. And so I just want you all to know you're all in a good place with us, and we're so glad that you are here today. I'm going to read, I addressed a number of them in the chat, but there's some of them, Annette, that I'm going to go ahead and share with you, and we will get to the questions as well. Some of these had questions in them, so I want to make sure I don't miss any of it. Also, this is recorded, so if you have to hop off, you will get the recording by email, and you can also catch it on our website. Just feel free to email us. Okay. We had someone ask, is self-love the same as not knowing that they are intrinsically valuable as being made in the image of God? And I let this person know that we are going to address self-love next week extensively. So it's a very it's a deep topic that I couldn't answer in just a few words, Annette. So
I think if you are, I'm a person of faith, and so if that is, I think that if you are, and you recognize that God really loves you, and the ways that He loves you, and the ways that He shows that and writes about it, I think that is an important piece to your healing process. But I'm going to teach about other psychological steps that you need to take to reach that point. But by all means, tap in to your faith to strengthen your belief in yourself, because God believes in you and doesn't wish harm on you. And so I think they go absolutely together.
Absolutely. We have a lot of advocates here today, so I want to acknowledge that as well, which is amazing. A lot of people who've used their own story to perpetuate their own healing journey.
Yeah, thank you for your hard work.
Yeah, now they're giving back. And so one of them is asking, I work at a facility. And this one may not have had a history, but I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot here who have shared their personal stories and how they're advocating now among youth in sex trafficking and all kinds of ways. So this person writes, I work at a facility called Blue Monarch. We're located in Tennessee. We work with women overcoming addiction and we allow for their children to live with them here. I have noticed the mothers and children can have a trauma bond. I have also noticed that just the siblings can have a trauma bond. Do you have any advice to help build a healthy bond between these women and their children?
Mm, okay. It, obviously that's a complicated, it's would have a complicated answer of several things, but the one thing that I would focus on training the parents to do is to emotionally attach to their kids, to be emotionally good listeners, not so much barking instructions and orders and or tuning out, because a lot of parents with addiction, they might just kind of like let the kids raise themselves and they're not really invested. They need to help their kids understand emotions. Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling confused? Are you angry? Whatever, as many emotions as the child age is capable of learning, and really teaching the parent to talk about emotions with them, not the parent sharing their emotions and burdening the child with the stress of that. No, it's more about acknowledging the child's emotions, apologizing for their addiction and where it has gotten them, and showing the child that they value what they think and that their perceptions are accurate. If they feel abandoned or if they feel disappointed, really teaching them to meet the child where they are emotionally and help them grow in their emotional IQ. I think that is one of the most healthy things that you can do for a child, is to really listen to them and support them in their emotional growth to create a strong attachment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annette.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. See, we have somebody keep coming in. Okay, hold on. It jumps the chat. So 1 second. I'm sorry to for the pause. Okay. My 27-year-old daughter is in a trauma bond, mirrors my 35-year marriage dynamic. She's back with her abusive partner and doesn't want to talk about it. Do I say anything or or have to wait until she comes to me again, pretending to be supportive of her relationship?
That's a really tough one. I think that you need to be really supportive of your daughter, treat her as an equal, show her respect, and don't talk down to her like you should do this or you should do that. But on the other hand, so basically you don't want to over confront your daughter. You should leave, or giving advice. And if she doesn't want your advice, doesn't want to talk about it, it's really not helpful to give advice. So I would say to treat her as an equal, trust her opinion, but at the same time that I'm saying to not over confront. We also say don't under inform. So you could go to our website and download our list of terms and definitions that describe these confusing, manipulative, and controlling behaviors that are too hard to pinpoint when you're in it. It's too chaotic and confusing to be able to identify the patterns of behaviors of some of these more obscure manipulative behaviors. But we have created a comprehensive list. And you might just say, last year you mentioned to me that he did this or that, and circle a couple on the list and say, I just wanted to give you this list. You have it in your free time, and you can see if you're experiencing any other of these behaviors, just to help you get clarity about the situation and not blame yourself for any way that you might be being mistreated. You can just casually do that, give her the list, not talk about it beyond that, and move on, and just be ready to be there for her.
Okay, the next question says, it sounds as if this type of relationship could never be healed. Annette is back with her husband. Would she have classified herself as trauma bonded?
I was definitely trauma bonded. So it was really, really hard to request a marital separation. And I have to say, most of these relationships do not repair themselves because the abuser does not want to do the work. And it's really hard work that takes a couple of years. They have to have their faulty beliefs unpacked, their public image, the way they protect their image. They have to be willing to be vulnerable and have it be exposed, which most of them are unwilling to do. They have to unpack their feelings of entitlement and hierarchical thinking, like their dominance. These are things that take years to unpack. It's not something that you sit down in a couple of therapy sessions. So I worked on myself during our 3-year marital separation. I had a lot of work to do. It was hard to get over the trauma bond. I mean, it was painful. I remember I was just feeling like my chest was ripping out. I was so attached to him, and for many of the wrong reasons. But while I worked on myself, he did the hard work, and I didn't expect a reconciliation. But when I saw the change, the transformation that had long-standing evidence of change and many scenarios to see it play out, because we then, like, once I really started seeing the change, we agreed to like go on a date once a month, nothing too quick, then go on a date twice a month. And I had plenty of opportunity to see how he was behaving. And it was a very slow process of reconciliation. And we have a beautiful marriage now. It's not perfect, but I am not experiencing abuse. I'm experiencing validation and support. And I am empowered to have my own voice and to set boundaries and have them be respected, and vice versa. But it was not an easy road. And I'm not here to recommend that, because the road is really hard just to get yourself healthy. And when you're interfacing at any level with somebody who is abusive, even during that 2-year process, well, 3 altogether, there were many setbacks that created a lot of chaos. Like he would retaliate and do all kinds of other things emotionally that were really disruptive, that hindered my progress, that sideswiped me and brought me back to that traumatic response. And so I don't think that's really healthy, but at the same time, I know that so many people hold out hope for their relationship, and I'm not one to say, you must leave, you must get a divorce. It's possible, but it takes tremendous work. It is not easy, and I just want to be realistic about that.
Yeah, that's really appreciated, Annette. Thank you for sharing all of that. We have a number of people even throughout this time, and I just want to read a couple of the comments that were made, because someone said this information has been invaluable for me to hear, to be so validated. And then another person, I feel like this is a detailed timeline of my life and my marriage of 30 years that I ended 4 years ago, and goes on to share more. But we have so much of that throughout this. So to hear, we have a number of questions that are asking, how do they heal, or how do they get help, or, we have, in fact, I'll probably just say that as a whole, and maybe you can address all of them as one. But we have someone who says, like, how would you recover from narcissistic, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, and having a trauma bond with them? And I think that encapsulates every question about healing we've had in this session.
Yeah, the most important first step is to gain clarity. So I really encourage you to join our class starting next Tuesday, because that will give you so much clarity, not only about an abuser's mindset, but about the types of abusive experiences that you went through, your own thought processes, the way other people respond, so many details. And it's just 4 weeks and it's really worth it. And I think that will jumpstart you on your healing process if there's narcissistic abuse.
Absolutely.
Then there's so many books that you can read. And there's other, like our next workshop is going to be very focused on this topic and healing and the steps that you need to take. But there's also an organization called Flying Free, and you can join her support group where she walks you through the healing process. Her name is Natalie Hoffman. And there's also Leslie Bernick's group, Conquer, which helps you overcome this form of abuse. And there's no pressure in either one of these organizations to stay or to leave. It's strictly about getting you stronger and clearer-minded. And they provide a lot of resources. So it's worth it to participate in an online group like that, where you're going to get some materials to really invest your time in, and you're going to get some help, and supplement that with a really good trauma therapist, someone who really understands, if you can. But even if you can't do a therapist, some people say they get more out of these groups and out of our training than they did in years of therapy. So I really encourage you to consider that as an avenue for recovery.
We have a couple of thank yous for giving hope. And if any of these questions have been unanswered today, or you need a link to resources, we have a number of questions about that, or any resources that Annette has mentioned, and we wrap up quicker than we can get to that, please email our team. You can reach out to us at info.
Yeah, we answer all our emails. So if you think of something later, just shoot us an email.
Yes, and we do have someone asking, well, we have a couple of things I just want to quickly address before we jump off, Annette. We do have someone who's asking, what about, is there resources for abusers, who are trauma bonded? And then someone who asked, are there any groups for men like this that you just listed off?
Yeah, so where my husband went and where I refer a lot of people to is called the Marriage Recovery Center. It's outside of Seattle, Washington. And you can find them online. And I recommend Dr. David Hawkins or Charmin Kimbrough. They do one-on-one counseling and group counseling. It's not inexpensive though, and so not everybody can afford that. And I'm going to have to, please shoot me an email and ask me this question, because I do know of another organization that might be more cost effective, but it's blanking from my mind right now. And he has a podcast, and I just can't think of his name. So I will send that to you if you just remind me in an email.
That's great.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that for everyone because I just can't think of what the name of it is.
And that's, yeah, thank you, Annette. And reach out to us, Annette. It will come back to mind. I know it will.
Oh yeah, I'll find it. I'll look for it and I'll find it.
Yeah. And for everybody who wrote just about being in a place, that Annette mentioned the 7 stages of trauma bonding, and a number of people noted that they were in certain stages like loss of self, or people who are constant, anxiousness and shaky and trembling and mind racing, or a fog, intense confusion, heart pounding, all of these. Annette, I don't know if you want to speak to that just real quick, if you want to say a word to that, but I just want to acknowledge everybody who said that here today.
No, it is so normal for that to be happening to you, but at the same time, it is so abnormal for you to be experiencing that in your life. I ended up getting really ill with latent autoimmune diabetes, Lyme disease, all that confusion and all the things that you've each mentioned. I experienced to, along with complex PTSD, and you probably have PTSD or complex PTSD, and it just hasn't been diagnosed yet, but the stressors from all that cortisol are going to start to really affect you physiologically, and you deserve better. So I want you to take care of yourselves. Go see a doctor, usually like a general practitioner or an internist, and be open. I am in a very toxic marriage. I have so much cortisol and stress, and it's affecting me physiologically. Is there anything that you can do for me from a medical point of view? Start to get the support and start to believe that you deserve better than that. You really do. You don't deserve that. You don't deserve brain fog and fragmented thinking and involuntary shaking and all that. I remember that so well. It was so painful. It's a hard road to travel to get out of, whether you decide to stay or leave. You can stay well, you can leave well, but you need to grow tremendously stronger and really believe in yourself and gain love for yourself back again. And that is a process, but it is worth the effort. And so I really hope that you will do that for yourself and join us in our workshop next week, where we'll talk more about it.
Really good, Annette. We'll stop there for today.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for all your comments and questions and interactions. It really enriches our time. And bye for now, and I hope I see you next week. Take good care.